And thank you all for your
Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Today on the show, Maxine Kaplan, author of young adult books, and we're going to discuss two of them, or she's written two of them for now. One is set in the real world, The Accidental Bad Girl, that has lots of high school drama. And the other one, Wench, is set in a world where magic is real, amateur magic and professional magic, two versions of it. The set today is actually an interpretation or riffing on the themes of the book Wench, if you will, as envisioned by our set design master Ruby. Now the
Yay, Ruby!
Oh, Maxine is already. We have a fairy
Yay,
flying here. Maxine, I
Ruby!
should have told you. Maxine, wait until I properly introduce. I
Oh,
might as well
sorry.
introduce you now. No, 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 no. Maxine Kaplan is right here. She's hovering across the table from me. She's a fairy. She's a wonderful fairy. Hello, Maxine. How are you?
Hi. How are you? I'm good, doing good.
I'm doing very well. Why? What's up with the fairy? Why did you choose to embody as a fairy today for the show?
Well, it's so rare that I get to actually inhabit a fantasy world outside of my head. And I've always loved fairies, and I'm very small, I'm very short, and I'm also very uncoordinated in both the technological realm and the IRL realm. So the idea of kind of floating and bouncing and flying around was very appealing to me, and I'm just so pleased with it.
Now, as I said, the book, and make sure please to have your speak button pressed on the bottom. People cannot hear you. The speak
Oh,
button,
sorry.
yeah, let's
Okay,
put the
now it's
speak button.
better. Okay, yeah.
Let's see here.
Sorry.
Ah,
There we go.
there we go. It's a very complicated world. I mean, it is populated by a lot of fairies. Incidentally, Second Life is Maxine. You didn't know this, but fairies, I think they're about 60, 70% of Second Life. No, I'm actually only halfway kidding. There's tons of fairy stuff. When you said fairy, can I be a fairy? We go like, can you be a fairy? There's literally thousands of dresses and animations and wings. And look at you now, you're turning around, you're
I should have
dancing.
asked to be a phoenix or something.
Oh, there's thousands of phoenixes, thousands. Baragon in the local chat says, hashtag Team Fairy. There you go. Alumia says there are entire fairy roleplay sims. Yes. Um, Now, don't distract me, my uh, beloved audience, because I want to quickly give you a synopsis of the book, and then we're going to look around the place here real quick. Now, your book Wench is about a uh, woman, a young woman by the name of Tanya. She's the hero. She was found as a baby, I believe, by the owner of a tavern, the Smiling Snake, and she essentially runs the Smiling Snake. The founder, um, the person who found her, trains her to run the place, and in that world of that you concocted, as I said, magic is possible and it's used all the time by a lot of people who actually have no business in using it. They're amateurs, and it's called the etherical. The ether is being manipulated, and it's called the etherical revolution. So there's all sorts of stuff hovering around, almost like these, like the particle effects that we see here. And in your book, it's called junk off. Those are the remnants of people who can't do magic, and they basically litter all this stuff all around the place. And Tanya discovers she can use a magic quill to identify different matter, different materials, and move that material anywhere she wants to. Um, and so the story unfolds. And of course, Maxine, you tell me if we're completely off. By sort of riffing on this theme, frankly, Minecraft came to mind. And so if the camera can pull back a little bit. we'll see that all the audience is sitting on little Minecraft um, chairs.
I love that. No, yeah, Minecraft isn't something that I knew, but the idea of having, can you guys hear me now? Okay, great.
Yes.
Um yeah, Minecraft I don't really know a huge amount about, but the idea of having amateur magic users was really appealing to me because I thought of it as an analog to the Industrial Revolution, where all these new technologies were coming out and nobody really understood how they worked, but they were all very ready to exploit it for economic gain immediately and didn't think about the environmental consequences. Because why would you? You can now move things far distances because you have coal and steam engines. And why would anyone care about the environmental consequences? So I really wanted the magic in this book to be an allegory for that. And also, just on a human level, I've always thought, what if there was magic that nobody really understood but still wanted to use it? Because I think that that's how it would really
Yeah.
be in the real world. I think that if all of a sudden we discovered that there was a magical resource in the world, everyone would be using it,
Everyone would
but
be, and you know what?
nobody would know how. And it's like how I don't like I use streaming devices all the time. If you asked me
Right.
to explain the science, I would have no idea what to do.
Right. Right now you're
None.
using Second Life and you don't know what to
Exactly.
do. And
Exactly.
as you're talking about an amateurish world, it was like, yeah, maybe you didn't think of Minecraft, maybe you thought of Second Life. But actually, I actually took in my notes like this whole everybody can use magic. I made a note here in my sheet, and I wrote down democratizing magic. And then I thought immediately of there was a book like years ago, forgot the name of the author, but he wrote a book called The Cult of the Amateur. And he was basically saying, this whole internet thing will lead to the complete um, collapse of culture because all amateurs will now be able to basically make content, which is what's happening, and that will destroy really good stuff. I mean, this is a very long discussion that that is a valid discussion, but I remember when the guy was on all the news shows 10, 12 years ago, people thought that he was incredibly elitist and super arrogant by suggesting we need um, a sort of, we need these, when we do away with the gatekeepers, everything will just devolve into really the, the debauchery and terrible stuff. I mean, some would argue, yeah, just look at YouTube. The guy was absolutely correct. Um, but it's a double-edged sword. I mean, the opening up
Yeah, I
of
mean, I
something is,
kind of
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I kind of think of it in a sort of different way where I'm not, for empowering gatekeepers over the democratization of magic or anything. I think that it's more not paying attention to the consequences of your event. Like, and a good friend of mine who's also a wonderful writer, and when their book comes out, you should talk to them because they're great. Read it and they were like, "This is about eco-fascism."
Hmm.
And that hadn't occurred to me, but it was exactly right that, this is about when people who don't take the time to learn about the consequences of their actions affect their communities with the junk off and just so people who haven't read it know, junk off is unexplainable environmental phenomena, a snowstorm in July, a desert where a lake used to be, a
Hmm.
mud pit where there wasn't one, a sinkhole where there wasn't one. And it's often it's not that dissimilar to what we're experiencing now with, oh, is there going to be an extreme heat wave this summer or a hurricane or wildfires? We just don't know, and it's because we used this technology without knowing what it would do to the world. So that was sort of where I was thinking of it. But also just kind of human fallibility of a lot of people are very greedy and take a lot of shortcuts, and also it's fun to use magic, and if you can, you would. Why wouldn't you? I would too, probably. I would be one of those people creating junk off.
Now, this whole junk off business, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And this is interesting. There is the environmental component of, or the consequences of what is being done. That is really a strong thread in the book. Also, we'll talk about the Bloodstone, where uh, actually behind us. Let's do this. Let the camera zoom up a little bit because we have envisioned this a little bit here. What Maxine is talking about, the environmental consequences. One of them is this volcano in the back, which is part of the book. It's a
Yes.
place in the world. It's called Bloodstone.
Yay.
And yeah, and I was also thinking like Bloodstone. You see basically people. I mean, this is like coal country, like I don't know, Kentucky in the U.S. context, where poor workers exploit the earth for the gain of others. And um, on the other side, behind us, is a wonderful Disney-esque castle. I
I
don't know if
saw
you.
that. That's
Isn't that
so
beautiful?
beautiful.
Now that's where the evil queen lives. Of course, the queen is evil. Well, I mean, the queen is also captivating the hero Tanya in the sense that she's kind of at least temporarily a kind of a role model. She gives Tanya a job, but the queen also schemes against her council, and she wants all the magic for herself. And she wants Tanya, the hero, to be the manager of magic. So that's happening. And
Yeah, something that I'm always interested in is subverting archetypes. And
yeah.
if you read a lot of fantasy, which I do, there's, the tavern maid that's ubiquitous in every fantasy world, almost as if she was duplicated from, a supply chain and installed against it in every fantasy tavern in any fantasy book across, all the multiverse. And I wanted to give her her own adventure, but I also wanted to play with one of my favorite archetypes just because it's so aesthetically pleasing, but the evil queen or the mad queen, if you will. And so that's why I wanted to complicate the relationship with the queen a little bit.
Yeah, she's definitely not mad. I mean, she's very focused on achieving her goal here. And like I said before we went on air, what's funny is that Tanya, this young woman, is experiencing sort of all these different steps that's where I, as a middle aged or a man approaching middle age, can relate to, like all these jobs that you have, like all these shitty jobs, these temp jobs, and then somebody says, "Hey, you're a management material." Come on in. And that's kind of what the queen says to Tanya. And then Tanya realizes that management has to do with doing unsavory things and also stuff that alienates her from her former, because it elevates her in the hierarchy and it kind of alienates her from her friends, essentially.
Yeah, and one of the things that Tanya struggles with throughout the book is a difficulty in connecting with people to begin with, because she was so
Yes.
alone growing up and sort of developed this almost toxic self-sufficiency just because she didn't want to be left alone again. She didn't want to be abandoned. So when she's confronted with people who see her good qualities and want to be her friend, she almost
Yeah.
doesn't understand it. And by the time that she sort of starts to get a glimmering of what it might mean to have a non-transactional relationship with somebody, she's kind of swept up into the queen's world and removed from all of that. And sort of moving up in status is placed directly in opposition
Yeah. And,
with
and,
it.
and exactly. And you know what, Maxine, I was just going to ask you if it bothers you when people sort of psychoanalyze your stuff and your characters, but I guess not. I guess we're having fun because some people say, I don't want to, no, I don't want to psychoanalyze it. It is what it is. But I think,
Oh no, yeah.
no,
It doesn't bother me because I mean it's a very personal thing for me. I mean, I feel like I what I was really responding to in my own psychology when I was writing this is this notion that I feel the need to justify my existence at all times. And I think that this is something that a lot of people in are experiencing, especially in my generation. I'm in my mid 30s, where as part of it is pathologized in an economic way where it's like we must hustle at all times, even our hobbies have to be
that's what I was going to
monetized.
say. I mean, if you
Yeah.
feel invalid, I mean, this is a direct outcome of this neoliberal conditioning where we see ourselves as functioning machines. And if something is not as fast as we think it should be, then we feel invalid.
But I think that part of that also comes across in the way that we relate to each other, at least in the way I relate to people, where I
Yep.
know that I'm desperate to prove my value in friendships, my value in my family, my value in relationships. And I think that that's something that a lot of people experience in all aspects of their life, and it all kind of gets smooshed together into one kind of driving force of I will be useful, that often saps you of your humanity.
It's incredibly corrosive. It's incredibly destructive. Matter of fact, we had ethnographer Kristen Gotzi from University of Pennsylvania on, I think a couple of weeks ago. She wrote a great book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism.
It's a
Fantastic
great
book,
title.
absolutely. And we were talking about the sort of that feeling of looking at ourselves as sort of machines and with value, even in the relationship. I brought up a slide here because this is what we're talking about. This is a slide with a quote from the book, with a little excerpt from the book. And this is Tanya, where she is in the middle of this journey with her friends, and the friends basically they grant her leadership, and they're excited, and they say, why don't you make this decision? And she says here, though she had picked her companions herself, she felt a tightness in her chest whenever she had to talk to them. So this is a good relationship that she has with these companions. Tanya did not know how to account for it. Why should she care that they weren't offering her what? Friendship, kinship? She had never felt kinship, non transactional kinship anyway, in Griffin's Port. That's where she basically grew up. And she had thrived. So she had thrived with this solitude, with this loneliness, because she had to. And she's not used to having friends. And here she says, or here you say in the book, her relationship with the queen that was explicitly transactional, and Tanya had never felt more fulfilled. So this is super interesting. She actually thrives with this in this transactional world.
Because it takes her emotional vulnerability out of the equation,
Hmm.
and it's not part of it. She doesn't have anything to fear. She doesn't have to fear being hurt.
Maxine, you answered this halfway, but Shyla is asking in the chat. And can you turn around a little bit? People are like, we want to look at you. You're facing
Sorry.
the No, you're facing the wall, because I know you, Dr. Draxtor here, is psychoanalyzing you in front of a huge audience. Um, she asks, are there commonalities between yourself and Tanya, the hero of Wench?
Yeah, I mean that's her conflict is my conflict. I mean, we manifest it in very different ways. I'm fairly gregarious. I try to ingratiate myself. But I also really struggle with this idea that I want to. I'm sorry, I'm trying to turn around. Let's see. Is that better?
A little bit until you see the audience. It's fine either way.
There
The,
we
ca-
go.
the ah,
There we go.
I think
Okay.
I think you're twirling anyways. The twirling is wonderful.
So it's that was like the inner conflict that I was trying to explore, and it is very personal to me. It's something that I deal with a lot in all of my relationships, and also in terms of it was also personal because of who I am as a reader and who I am as a fantasy writer and a fantasy reader, and who I always was as a kid,
Right.
which was I was a very imaginative kid, like almost, and I do not mean that as a brag. I mean that as like I was debilitatingly imaginative as a kid, but I never saw anybody who was a hero in these kinds of stories that I could imagine myself being without radically changing something about me. I wasn't fantastically athletic.
Hmm.
You would not give me a sword. I fall down a lot just in general. I'm not fantastically athletic. I'm not, fearsomely beautiful. My IQ didn't break the bank. I didn't have like a secret skill. I wasn't royal in my blood. I wasn't chosen, and I desperately wanted to be. And as I grew up, I didn't look like the people who were fantasy heroes. And the way I describe Tanya is basically, how I look in real life. So I wanted to write an adventure story where I could imagine real world skills actually coming into play. And I'm,
Hmm.
not the world's most organized person, but I can put together a system. You know, I can manage a team. I can do that kind of thing. And to find a way to elevate skills that I recognize, skills that I could believe that I could develop without changing something fundamentally about me was really important to me, especially since although I want adults to read this, and I think I would have read it had it come out as an adult, I am gearing it towards young readers. And I think it's really important to be able to see a realistic way to affect change in these kinds
Yeah.
of fantasy adventure worlds, because that's where you find inspiration.
This is really interesting. You describe yourself. I mean, it sounds, with like I'm not very athletic. I'm not this. You describe yourself as average, and it just occurred to me that the other trope of like in fantasy or in many other books is the anti-hero or the one, I mean, like, let's take Harry Potter or something like that, where where it's the other end of the spectrum, where somebody is really suppressed and harassed and
Yeah.
has these really sort of negative, and then he just jumps out of his shell and becomes this hero. But and as you're speaking, you're so spot on about the lack of heroes that are good people, but they're not like superhero
They're
talented
not
or
chosen, you
exactly,
know?
exactly. So they're neither superhero chosen for whatever reason or like totally suppressed and against all odds, then sort of finding something that elevates them somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely that was the that's where I started. That was like point A of starting to write this book, was wanting to really dig into who gets to be a hero in in our fantasies, in our fantasy life.
Now, I have here on my run sheet that we need to look at the other stuff, but we're so in the middle of the conversation that I don't want to walk over to the Minecraft crafting table and look at that real quick. But I think I'm contractually obligated to. Um, as I'm walking over there, and the camera, please follow me. You can stay here, Maxine. I'll be right back. I just want to show that the Minecraft crafting table that we have over here has a miniature version of this world
Oh my goodness.
on this Minecraft crafting table, and I hope the camera can follow me. And there's all these different blocks of different materials that are movable. So tell us what the quill is all about. The quill is a thing that Tanya can operate. What can she actually do with it? I'm not sure if I explained this really well. She takes
Yeah.
materials and they just she
The
the materials are identified on some sort of map.
yeah, the quilt, basically what I conceived of as the aetherical revolution is that people have found out that there are these sort of like it's almost magical string theory, you know, where different elements can be accessed through their molecules, kind of, you know, whatever
Ah,
fantasy world of that, and you can move them around, you can manipulate single source matter, is basically the magic that we're dealing with, but people are doing it in this very disorganized way. And what the quill does is that the quill kind of sucks up all of that energy, all of that information, and can spit it back out.
s-
You can so you can visualize where everything is, and you can manipulate it using the quill. You can manipulate it the way you would write. I sort of thought of it as like a fantasy equivalent of a 3D printer almost. You know,
I see.
you can kind of move, but it's sort of you can move single source things around to compile things or make something bigger or make something smaller or just transport something. And then the natural result of that, which is junk off, which is unpredictable environmental phenomena, you can also see that populate on the map and, you know, address it, or otherwise ameliorate it. And in the world of the book, this was not a naturally occurring object. This quill, this was a
Well,
basically an
the quill was
experimental
made
sign.
right by people who were qualified, but it was unleashed
Yeah.
to the world. And there's a scene, well, in the beginning, Tanya, who works in the tavern, she has an apron, and on the apron she draws that map with the quill, and that's really such an awesome scene. She draws the map, and then she takes the map, identifies here is water, here is wood, here's rock, and then she just takes the water and moves it around. Like I'm moving on the screen right now. If people watch me on YouTube or whatever, you can see me moving these Minecraft blocks around.
Yeah,
And then it happens in the real world. And then later in the book, she realizes, hey, wait a minute, if I'm actually on this, whatever it is, ice, rock, then I could teleport myself with that material if I tell the material to go elsewhere, because if I'm sitting on it, then I will also be moved, right?
exactly. Exactly. And so she becomes more adept at using this magic, which is a really pretty limited, function, because she has a tool to it's more like, it's kind of like the advanced settings of the magic.
Well, in Second Life, it's called the right click and edit mode, but I digress. We could do that here, you know.
Yeah,
We can so do that. Let me look at the at the local chat. There's an interesting comment from Baragon. He says a benefit of transactional relationships is that they are unambiguous.
for sure. I mean,
Mhm,
and in that way, they're very easy to manage. They're very easy to predict. They're very easy to prioritize. They're very easy to fit into your life. And I think that that's why Tanya spent so much of her time um, trying to preserve a way for her to have those relationships. I mean, the tavern is basically her quest in this book is to get her tavern back. She loses her tavern after her guardian dies due to like a bureaucratic error basically, and she just wants her own tavern back. She just wants to be her own boss and to operate her life the way that she wants. And if you start bringing other people into the conception of that, things become a lot more complicated, which, especially when you're a teenager, which Tanya is, complications are not always that appealing.
mhm,
They're dangerous.
mhm. Now, I would say let's get a little bit of a taste of the story, of the style of this wonderful book, Wench. If you're just tuning in, you're tuning in about 30 minutes too late. I love saying this. I like scolding the audience, Maxine. This is kind of a area of my expertise. And magically, there's a book stand with Wench, and it's being moved towards you. And I think we're hearing a little bit of a sequence that has a little bit of action in it. Oh, I should say before you read, because I was just coming across um, this slide that we prepared. We keep mentioning there is amateur magic because it's so available, and there is, of course, professional and semi-professional magic. And this guy Rollo, who Tanya encounters, who is super annoying, but he's also an apprentice and he knows what he's doing. Just want to read this before you read,
Sure. I
Maxine.
love
This is,
Rollo.
yeah, such awesome characters, and we'll talk a little bit later. There is no sex or anything like that in there, but there is a little bit of romance and also figuring out who I'm attracted to, and it's just wonderful. But Rollo here is certainly Tanya is not attracted to him. He's super annoying,
Nope.
but he knows what he's doing magic wise. So this quote is a little bit about the uh, this is not about the quill, but this shows you what happens in the world when you know what you're doing. Rollo had somehow made a replica of the image of the knight and sucked it into his wand. He twisted the copy of the world he had extracted around his wand like a ribbon, and then, with a quick flick of the wrist, he shot it all back out again, throwing it around himself and Tanya as if it were a blanket or a cape. Tanya dropped her jaw. Rollo, the whiny harassment of a boy she had dismissed as a consummate amateur, had somehow made a copy of the world and thrown it over them. She could see through it, but it was like looking through fishing net. She swallowed. Are we invisible? So this is just like a really cool little glimpse into really cool writing, Maxine. I mean,
Oh,
I
thank
have to
you.
say it's, it's awesome. Uh, yeah. So what are we hearing now?
Yeah, this is sort of this is another, because I thought it'd be good to get like a hint of like where this magic can go wrong also. This is a heist that Tanya gets conscripted into doing because she can use the quill at this point, and she falls in with a band of thieves, and they're sent by the crime boss to steal a tiara from a duchess. And the idea is Tanya is supposed to remove a cellar floor that's supposed to be all marble, and that's where we're starting. If should I go ahead and start?
Yes.
The ceiling was shot through with impurities, more filler than marble. She could remove each element one at a time, of course, but that would not only take forever, it would inevitably cause a wide array of junk off. It was deeply inefficient. That left the other option. Riley, she said, touching the edge of her tongue to the quill, I'm going to stick to the plan. I'm going to remove the marble. You might want to step back a little bit. She looked at the map. Moving with as light a hand as possible so as to disturb as few elements as possible, she circled each instance of marble. The mine shaft rumbled. Riley and Jana exchanged a glance and moved to the back of the alcove. Tanya barely noticed because she suddenly realized that no one had told her where to put the marble. She scoured the landscape, trying to find a good spot, but they were in flatlands. There was no convenient cavern or mountain range in which to insert it. It would wreak havoc in the forest. She sighed, cursing her inexperience and thievery. She really should have thought of this. But there was only one obvious answer. She braced herself and drew arrows from the circle directly into the walls of the mine shaft themselves. It started slowly, just a slight vibration in the stone underneath her knees, but it spread outward and outward until her vision blurred and a faint but distinct and steady buzz, like a gathering swarm of bees, filled the air. Tanya? Asked Riley, bracing himself against the wall. Tanya looked at the ceiling and held out a hand. Wait, she said softly. Out of the corner of her eyes, she spied Jana holding out her arms and balancing on the balls of her feet, swaying to the deep, rocky hum as if it was music. A crackling sound echoed through the chamber, and Tanya refocused on the ceiling as deep grooves in the surface formed, widened, and finally exploded. A white sandy slurry that defied gravity poured out of the ceiling in controlled but unstoppably heavy streams, wriggling like snakes, winding their way out of the ceiling into the walls and pooling briefly around their feet, soaking their boots before being absorbed into the floor with the sucking sound of a whirlpool. The mine shaft stopped shaking. Tanya stood. Haphazard bars of clay and tubes of red dust, somehow still suspended in the air, partially blocked her view into the wine cellar, but she could see it. She had done it. They could climb up. She laughed in amazement, and after a moment, Riley joined her, bending over at the waist as he exhaled what must have been a very long held breath. Jana cupped her hands around her mouth and whooped. Tanya looked down. The marble had settled into the bottom of the shaft as if it had always been there, inlaid in an attractive swirling pattern. She lifted her boots, now inundated with damp, pale grit, and grimaced at the heaviness before breaking out in another smile. She had dissolved to marble. Looking up again at the dust she had suspended in thin air, she was filled with awe. She lifted a finger and touched a strand of pulverized red brick. It collapsed at her touch. Huh, she said, frowning at her reddening fingertip. That's a worrying. Before she could finish that sentence, the remainder of the ceiling rained down on her head, coating her head to toe in soot and brown powder. Tanya barely had time to spit the grime out of her mouth when the mine shaft began rumbling again. What did you do? Yelled Riley, bracing himself again. Nothing, she yelled back, equal parts panicked and furious at how clean he still was. She hesitated, or maybe, hang on. She dipped to the floor and snatched her most recent map. Oh no. Oh no? What is oh no? She looked up. We should climb up into the castle now. The mine shaft's going to cave in. Jana didn't hesitate. She vaulted into the air, and with a grunt, she cut the jagged edge of what used to be the cellar floor. The whole shaft shuddered again, like a giant about to be sick, and Jana's left arm slipped from the edge. Tanya cried out, and Riley stumbled to her side. But Jana appeared unconcerned. She hung by one flexed wrist and angled her head backward, calmly surveying the wine cellar, its gold leaf edged shelves supporting an endless variety of bottles. Jana said, Got it, and hurled the dangling left side of her body upward, catching one of the shelves. The muscles in her arms visibly rippling, she pulled the rest of her body up so that it was level. She repeated this pattern 3 more times until, before Tanya could begin to figure out how she was making her limbs move the way they were, she had clambered across the shelves to the door, which she casually opened and hopped through. Jana looked down at them from the hallway. You better hurry, she warned, pointing behind them. Tanya and Riley turned. A brown, humid tidal wave of liquefied rock and mulched earth was heading straight for them. Riley stood under the cellar and raised his arms. Boost me, he ordered Tanya. I'll pull you up after. Tanya crammed the quill and the map in her belt. She bent beneath Riley's waist and hoisted him up, her arms falling squarely between his knees and his behind. She thought a prayer to the Lady of Cups, patron goddess of tavern maids, and lifted. He was bonier than she had expected, and lighter too. Underfed, thought Tanya. He shot up through her arms and grabbed at the second lowest shelf. He swung his legs up to land on the shelf underneath that. The mine shaft shook, and muck started to pool around Tanya's feet. She could hear him knocking over bottles and muttering something under his breath. Taking a deep breath and biting his lip, he let go with one hand. He arched backward, swaying in the shuddering, dusty air. He gulped and stretched his hand out to Tanya. The groundswell was already up to her knees, sticking to her clothes and sucking her in. She jumped. She caught his hand and swung like a pendulum in a grandfather clock, heavy and horizontal. Careful, gasped Riley as she finally managed to jam her feet into the shelves. Together they scrambled across the shelves until they found the door and tumbled through, rejoining Jana. The mulch was still rising, sealing off their exit. Riley sighed. That's a shame, he said, and Jana shut the door. They made their way down the corridor, following Riley as he hugged the wall. Behind this door is a small staircase leading to the serving gallery behind the banquet hall, he told them in a low, urgent voice. From there, our route to the Duchess' bedroom is, he began ticking it off on his fingers. From the gallery to the dumbwaiter, which leads to the dressing room directly off the bedchamber. The tiara is under her vanity in a safe. I crack the safe, or I smash it, broke in Jana.
And that was Maxine Kaplan reading from Wench. And I just realized that the pages were blank, but then the pages filled with writing. And we should also say, I mean, we mentioned that this gaggle of friends and colleagues or co-workers or people on a mission that were thrown together, Greer, Riley, and Jana. Um, and as we said, this is one of the wonderful aspects of the book that Tanya negotiates her relationship with them and sort of navigates and discovers what it means to have closer relationships because she grew up alone as a foundling in this tavern in this really small microcosm. Um, Shyla, our researcher found out that you are a big Dungeons and Dragons um, fan.
I am. I've as an adult I've played it less, but I played it a lot in high school, and I have a dear friend who's actually big in the D&D world, so I'm not going to say her name because she's a huge dungeon master, and so whenever I get the chance to play with her now, she's amazing. She'll she'll draw these elaborate maps, and she'll have all these like twists and turns and secrets for each character, and it's such a fun thing to do. And I'm getting back into gaming after not having done it for a few years. But when the book came out, my friend who's a dungeon master helped me come up with character builds
Aha.
for Tanya and Rollo and Jana, and that was part of the pre-order campaign for this book, where if you pre-ordered it, you got these character builds so that you could play in D&D, or whichever your tabletop gaming choice is, as one of these characters with their sort of pluses and minuses.
That's awesome. There's actually a
Yeah, it was
guy
fun.
there's a guy in Second Life who makes small little tabletop games that people play as avatars, and they move it in Second Life with the tabletop
Oh
parts. They
wow.
they they move it around. There's also I think a D&D table. Another one of your this is what I want to read. I mean, Terry Pratchett, who people should be aware of with
Terry
Discworld.
Pratchett was a huge influence on me.
This is a quote here, and we talked about this a little bit before. Terry Pratchett is quoted as saying, "Kids are prepared to accept any amount of weirdness if they think the story is fun. It's set a long way away, and the rats can talk, and so can the cat. And the kids are like, yeah, right, we know this stuff. We're familiar with this kind of territory. Just give us enough explanation for us to accept for the moment what it is you're, trying to tell us, and then let's have some plot. You don't have to particularly give lots of backstory to some of your characters." So this is a wonderful quote that I think gives license to opening up the imagination. But I could play devil's advocate and say, Terry Pratchett is basically saying people who write for young people, uh, it's really easy because they just throw some stuff and steer it around a little bit and throw it out. There doesn't have to be any logic in the plot. They can just do all sorts of Deus ex machina type stuff, and they don't really have to think things through. How would you
Well,
respond?
I would actually push back on that, and I think that's assuming that it's really easy to make things fun. I
Hmm.
think that that's one of the hardest things to do, because things aren't, you can't access the fun if you're not actually accessing a fully built out world, right? So the idea is to just, I think what he was getting at there, because I love that quote from Terry Pratchett, and I think it gets to the heart of why a lot of us who write for teenagers and kids, um, which is they're fine with weirdness. They don't
Hmm.
need to have references to a million other stories in it. They don't mind if you mix genres, if you mash up tropes. Like, you can do, like, there's a persuasion in space YA novel, and teenagers are just like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. We're going to read
Hmm.
that, and we're going to read that next to this thriller by, Karen McManus, and we're going to read it next to this, adventure story by Rick Riordan. Like, there's no separation of genre and literary expectations when
But
you're dealing with
Maxine,
younger kids.
but wait a minute. Okay, but Maxine, don't all these people then grow up to be uh, grumpy adolescents who message and email and call all movie studios about that they did something wrong with Star Wars and they know what the Bible is and they made a mistake in that year with that character,
I
and
think those are mostly adults doing that.
I
Honestly, I think that's mostly adults
think so too,
who
actually.
are yelling about Star Wars. I think if you probably ask teenagers, what did you think of Rose Tico? They'd probably be like, "Great, loved her."
Well, actually, in the year 19 whatever, I don't even know my references, but he used to wear a blue shirt and not a red shirt in this episode. So that means that in episode XYZ, he did this.
That's the kind of persnicketyness that comes with age. That's not something you have to worry about. You do have to, like, if things are boring when they don't have a through line, when you lose
Mhm.
track of what you're reading thematically and character wise, you lose interest in the story, right? Like, that's how we read. So I think that, yes, to the weirdness, kids will accept the weirdness, and that's why it's so much fun to write in YA, because there's so much more elasticity in what you're allowed to put together and the connections you're allowed to make. But keeping things fun is actually where the hard stuff is,
Yeah,
because there's so much underlaying stuff.
yeah. Bloodfang here says in the local chat, he says, "Pff, boomers." Okay, okay, boomer, you with your
I
pedantry.
don't think I'm a boomer. I'm not that old.
No, 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 Maxine, no, 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 not you. No, no, no. No, Bloodfang is, I think we're all on the same page here. He was in my mind directing this towards the person that we're kind of poking fun at, which is that
Yeah.
the pedant actually, as you I think rightly analyzed it, those are the adults. Those are not
Yeah.
teenagers anymore. That type of pedantry comes with adulthood for some people anyway, and then it's just locked in and they just become grumpy when their entertainment is not as
Which
expected.
isn't get like customized specifically to them.
Well, these are the same people who complain about uh, their Starbucks coffee that it's not the perfect color that they had on Monday,
Yeah.
perfect shade of brown. Let's see here. What is Stella? Stella says, I like the comment you made on Twitter. Never
Yeah.
date a guy who reads Ayn Rand. Elasticity is a great tool in writing. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh boy. Don't get me started with Ayn Rand. When we have Matt Ruff back, he wrote an amazing book. The what is it called? Gas, sewage, and electric. With Ayn Rand fairy in a bottle, actually,
Oh, really?
an AI. It's hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, it's. Oh my God, I can't even think of the title. It's the sewer, gas, and electric because the Public Works trilogy, sewer, gas, and electric because I read it in German.
I'll have to look that up. That sounds hilarious.
Super fun. Okay, but we're here with Maxine Kaplan, and I did not read the Batgirl book because I ran completely out of time.
It happens.
I read 4 books this week. I mean, Max,
That's a lot of books.
Maxine is giving me here. She's of course mad that I did not read The Accidental Bad Girl, and now I can't even find my Marshall McLuhan. Here we go. Marshall McLuhan, ladies and gentlemen, was a famous Canadian media theorist. He famously coined the term "the medium is the message" in his book Understanding Media, 1964. He distinguished between cool media and a cool medium that requires a little more involvement intellectually, reading, and hot medium like television that is just immediately sort of pushing on all our buttons. Why do I bring him up? Because he recommends that if you're interested in a book, read page 69 of any book. And if you like that page, buy the book. Okay. So that's from a book, How to Read a Novel by John Sutherland. But this is actually what Marshall McLuhan said. Now, Maxine, I'm going to read page 69 of The Accidental Bad Girl. If I could ask
Great.
my staff to bring up the book display, please. It's hidden underneath.
I
And you,
gotta see what's on page 69 of Excellent Bad Girl.
so this is the physical version. Of course, I mean, people have pointed out like, oh my, how do you know what page 69 is with ebooks and different formatting and hardcover and stuff like that? So this changes around sometimes. But we're using the paperback edition of Accidental Bad Girl. And all I know from Accidental Bad Girl, if I look at the back cover, it says Kendall used to be a good girl. That was before the entire senior class discovered her hooking up with her best friend's ex. And before she became an instant pariah and vowed to keep her head down until she escaped her small Brooklyn private school for good. But no such luck. She discovers her online identity has been hacked and she's been framed for stealing a drug dealer's stash. If she wants to repair her tattered reputation and save her neck, she'll have to pretend to be a bad girl everyone thinks she is. Now, if you don't like this back of the cover, again, you go there and like, yeah, cool, online identity stolen, Brooklyn private school. That sounds like some good stuff, but I'm not super convinced. I need to be convinced. You open page 69 and here it goes. Kendall, talk to me, she said earnestly, grabbing my wrist. I'm your friend. Get away from me, I hissed at her, trying to extricate my arm. Audrey suddenly let go and buried her face in her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I would have been impressed if I hadn't been there the first time, Audrey cried on demand, to get out of trouble when she snuck into the hotel pool on the 8th grade field trip to D.C. But I had been the only one back then, so when she did it now, a hush fell over the hallway as Audrey hunched over and her shoulders shook. When you did what you did with Grant, I was angry, but I hoped our friendship would eventually get past it. Don't get me wrong, it was real betrayal, but I told myself to remember how frustrating it must have been for you to watch your friend with the guy you secretly wanted. I felt bad for you, but it's because I assumed you liked him, not that it was all about sex. She drew a raggedy gasp and continued with narrowed, clear eyes staring straight at me. Now I'm just worried about you, Kendall. Despite everything, I still care about you, and I don't want you to put yourself in dangerous situations. Grant is one thing, but strangers? Where are you meeting these guys? How old are they? Are you being safe? At each question, her voice went an octave higher, painting pictures in my head and in everyone else's head. Look, just be careful, sweetie. I'm still here for you. It's senior year after all, promise. You'll come to me if you ever get into trouble. So I'm sold. Okay, so that's page 69. It has high school drama. I mean, it has the, cheating. I mean, this is all I need. So Marshall McLuhan, uh, rest in peace. Wonderful author, very important research how we consume media, but that is probably the biggest gift he gave to us. So thank you.
Thank you for doing such a great reading.
If there's no audiobook, I'll record it, but I'm a man. I think it should be
There
probably
there is an
narrated by a woman.
audiobook actually.
Is it narrated by a woman?
It is narrated by Julia Nippon.
Oh God, see, white men can't get jobs anymore. Anyways, please now we have you read and give us a little bit of the sort of the plot summary maybe to start us off. I know you start from the very beginning, but
Yeah, I'm gonna read the prologue, but basically, my sort of nutshell description of Bad Girl when I was pitching it is that it's a feminist reinterpretation of North by Northwest in high school, and it's kind of a deconstruction of the femme fatale.
mm,
Uh, Basically, an origin story for a femme fatale. What, like all these femme fatales that show up in James Bond and in Hitchcock movies, and they just sort of seem to form to spring out fully formed to be a foil for the bad men um, and the good men, and what kind of situation would turn somebody into that kind of archetype. So sort of digging into that archetype, and this is the prologue, so starting from the very beginning. It was a game after all. It made sense that eventually we'd make it to the school gym. Grant Powers pulled me down the hallway by the wrist, laughing as he hitched up the black gown pooling around his khakis. The tassel tickled my nose as his cap nearly fell off my head in the mad dash through the double doors to the Bank of Athletic offices high on the fifth floor of Howell. The gym was empty. Of course it was. Grant stopped short, and I crashed into his broad back, briefly breathing in the grassy detergent smell of him. He reached backward and pulled me into a one armed embrace, squashing me against his chest. He bit my ear, and I squealed. What now? I asked, my voice still muffled in his gown. Does the prom king have any last requests before he abdicates the throne in, oh, about an hour? Grant spun me outward, and his cap finally did fall. Let me think about that, he said with a wicked grin. Then he nodded to something over my shoulder. I turned my head and saw the equipment cage, the chain link enclosure in the most shadowy corner of the room. Before I could answer, he had maneuvered me into the rusted out metal box. The next thing I knew, I was flat on my back, my butt squeaking against the nubby, padded nylon of a gym mat. Grant was on top of me, unbuckling his belt. The sunlight pouring through the high glass windows flashed against something on his across something on his wrist, momentarily making me squint. The sun moved, and I saw that they were cufflinks. Specifically, they were 14-karat gold cufflinks, engraved with his initials. Etched onto the back of each were a heart and the letter A. I knew that because I was there when Audrey bought them for him as a present for his 18th birthday. I pushed that thought out of my head and concentrated on Grant, arching my back, trying to lose myself in the heat from his palms on my skin. We weren't technically having sex yet, but my underwear had been flung to the side and a condom retrieved. He went to unzip my skirt. Wait, I said, lifting my head off the floor. What? He asked, his voice excited, even hysterical. I shook my head, concentrating, but it was gone. I thought I heard something, I told him. Like what? I looked at him, suddenly suspicious. His voice was too casual to match the glitter in his eyes. I pushed him off me and sat up, holding my half unstrapped bra to my chest, straining to hear. The gym was empty. Then the heavy metal doors leading from the locker rooms boomed open, and the gym was decidedly not empty. The entire senior class, capped and gowned, breathless, cheeks rosy with excitement, thundered in. I stumbled to my feet, twisting my underwear around my ankles, needing this not to be happening. But it was happening. The distracted bustle in the air could protect me for only so long, and eventually, like dominoes, their eyes fell to the equipment cage and to me, stumbling back into my clothes. And also to Grant, who was laughing sheepishly and buckling his pants at a leisurely pace. A boyish whoop blew through the room. Someone yelled, "Fuck yeah, Powers!" Couldn't speak. I couldn't think. All I could do was try not to melt, and then Grant put his mouth next to my ear. "Hey, Kendall, don't worry," he breathed. How? I couldn't finish the query, looking wildly from person to person, identical in black and blue, and not recognizing any of them, just the look of witness to a train wreck delight on their faces. I finally turned to Grant. "You knew?" I squeaked. "The seniors." I tried to shake some focus into my head, but failed. "You knew they would be here." He'd been grinning at his friends, but then he looked at me, affection in his eyes. "You're really cute and you're nervous," he said. He bent down and kissed me on the cheek. He sauntered away, pausing only to pick up his graduation cap, leaving me alone and unprotected in the cage. Actually, scratch that, in high school.
wow. So this is the prologue to the accidental bad girl. Uh,
Yes.
Big round of applause. This is a very different vibe. This sets us
Yeah,
off right
I'm
away.
not.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
I
This
have too many genres. I should just pick one, but I don't.
No, you shouldn't. You should never. You should read all of Matt Ruff's book and then listen to his interviews where he said he carved himself out a niche where people are expecting him to jump genres, and he made a good career out of it. Now, this is really excellent, but this is what I have here. Now, there's a lot of well, sexual relations happening here.
Yeah,
Um,
it's more. It's for slightly older teens.
mhm. There's no sex in Wench.
No.
Hmm. Why?
Um, honestly, because I'm very the romance in Wench means a lot to me personally, but I hadn't actually intended to have any of it. I had kind of a philosophy where I wanted to get through an entire fantasy adventure without putting in a romance, and especially not a love triangle, which there is kind of a love triangle
A
in
little bit,
Wench.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but that happened very organically and kind of just came with the characters and sort of with where I was personally at the time when I was writing it. But it wasn't the point of it for me in Wench. Wench was about friendship and found family and magic and industry and power. Accidental Bad Girl has different preoccupations. Accidental Bad Girl is very much a book about rape culture,
Mhm.
um, and which is I wrote it. It came out in 2018, so it was right when Me Too was happening, and also one of the things that really inspired me to it was, and I don't know how many of you are in America or so know about this, but there were this rash of incidents where seventh grade girls were getting sent home from school for wearing leggings,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
The interesting
Um,
thing is that actually that phenomenon is also happening in Germany. It's funny because the Germans often point out, it's a very sort of black. I talk about this often with my American family and the German family, where the Germans are always like, oh yeah, the Americans are crazy. They're overreacting on all sorts of things. The exact same thing was happening where women were actually, frankly, I mean, they were blamed, or girls were blamed
yeah,
for these issues in the patriarchy, and vilified, and I mean, the prototypical victim shaming and blaming stuff going on there.
which is exactly what I wanted to address in the
Mm,
Accidental Bad Girl. So, and I wanted to address it in a way that also was sex positive, because I think that when you put those two things in opposition, um, you're victimizing people just as much as other, like, insisting
absolutely.
that girls be chaste or uninterested in sex is just as damaging and just as toxic, and actually is a vital part of maintaining rape culture. So
Absolutely. I mean, I said this before we went on the air. My son is 18, and this is something as a parent. When I mean, I'm reading in a way. I think if I psychoanalyze myself, the the reason why I enjoy current YA in all its forms, fantasy, realistic, whatnot, is to reconnect with my own youth and get reminded of how did I navigate, or my crew navigate these issues, vis-a-vis how authors of today see this and express this, and then sort of I extrapolate from that what I feel may have changed or may not have changed. So it's in a way like a little bit of a time travel thing
yeah.
for me as a 51-year-old man, but also a little bit of sort of coming from a different planet and trying to find out what's happening on this planet. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a very different book, but
It's an awesome. I mean, this is real. I'm glad that you read um the prologue here. You mentioned sex positive. I say this tongue in cheek. It's also drug positive, Maxine. What's up with that? Let me read you this little quote here that we prepared. Alcohol didn't glow with glamour for me the way it did for some other kids in my class. I had always attributed that to the fact that I was given access to beer and wine from 13 on, meaning I didn't have what I tended to think of as puppy let off the leash syndrome. But I did have a secret relationship with alcohol. I didn't get drunk often, but I did have a small glass flask of bourbon swiped from my kitchen hidden in my sock drawer. If I had a bad day or felt somehow bereft or bored, I would just look at it. Every so often I took a swig, and it made me feel better. I think it's very important to address, you know, drug use and stuff like that among teens. So it's important that you put that in. But comment on this a little bit because
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a weird little moment. And it's I think that there's a certain comfort in transgression, especially if you're used to being like a good girl, you know. And that particular moment was actually drawn from my own experience when I was a kid, where I did have, like, a secret bottle like that, and I never got drunk, never did anything bad. I was very much like, I barely left my. I was practically an agoraphobe in high school. I would go to school and I had four friends' houses that I would go to, and that was basically it. But there is a certain comfort and allure to transgression that I think has a place, but I also think can spiral quickly out of control, which does happen in the book. But I think it's because everybody is different and everybody has a different perspective going in, and everybody has a different aim with it. If your aim, and I think that Kendall's aim with that is actually fairly healthy. She's like, I'm feeling fucked up, essentially, and this will make me feel better and also will not hurt me.
hmm
And I
hmm
think that not everybody has that perspective on it. I think that, and that's something that I noticed when I went to college. And, not that I was given lots of alcohol, but like, if my parents were having a dinner party, and I said, can I have a glass of wine? They would give me a glass of wine. And it meant that I didn't immediately start binge drinking in college. And, you see that happen so often.
absolutely.
So I think that there is nuance to it. And my thinking on this has evolved slightly, but I also don't consider myself a moralist. I don't consider that I'm writing books about people who are role models.
hmm
I don't think Kendall is a role model. I think it's mostly a book about kind of screwed up people making mistakes and then doing their best to fix it, however ineptly. And if you're reading my books for, tips and tricks on how to live, you're barking up the wrong tree, really. And I think
Listen,
that
kids, listen, kids. Don't read Maxine's books for tips and tricks. Better to read Ayn Rand and Jordan Peterson, okay? So you got plenty to choose from.
I
Oh
just
my
think
God.
it's very messy. I
Yeah,
think that drugs and alcohol and sex are very messy. And
yeah.
I think that it's sort of that when we're writing in the perspective of teenagers, where it's arguably the messiest, although not necessarily, um, it sort of behooves you to live where it actually lives, live in the messiness of it.
I Maxine, this is really wise stuff that you're saying here. I mean, I struggled a lot with my son when it came to the time when he were was in started getting interested in just trying out drinking and stuff and smoking some weed and stuff like that. And I did not anticipate how I would sort of react to that because we did a lot of stuff, and I became, I guess, a strange conservative person for a while until my wife and other friends said, you know what, you got to like snap out of it. The leash syndrome here that you're describing is, of course, in the U.S. context that I also found very strange because I came to the U.S. when I was 23, and I felt that there was a connection with this binge drinking because when you're of age, when you're 21, and all of a sudden you're legally allowed to drink, then you completely overdo it. And I felt like the European model of allowing beer at 16 and then hard liquors at 18 is much better. It's much more nuanced than that. I completely agree with you. Just want to read this comment. Helena says in some cultures outside the US, it is common to give young people at home watered down wine, etc., at dinner with the family, so it does not become taboo. I mean, all of this
Yeah.
stuff does not take into account also different personality types, different, um,
And look, if you have a
addictive
tendency towards
personalities.
alcoholism, that's a disease, and
I
that's
was
a
just going to
disease
say,
that's often, passed down in the genes. I mean, there's
yeah,
still research on that, but it's definitely a hereditary illness,
yeah.
which is, I think, different. I think that there are people who are. I am not qualified to talk about alcoholism because it's not something from which I mean, I've had moments in my life where I've had, I'd say, inappropriate relationships with alcohol, but I am not an alcoholic, so it's not. It's a very different thing. But I think that there is a lot of room for nuance in that, and part of it, part of being human is inebriation, right? Like not necessarily alcohol or drugs, but like part of, like, primates would bang their head against the tree to, get a lightheaded feeling. Like that's an instinct that's just very human. Um
Yeah,
and I
yeah, no,
and
I
I
don't.
just I thought that it almost would have been a weird omission to not address that part of it in this book, especially in the milieu that it's taking place in,
Oh,
which is,
absolutely. The
prep
context,
schools in New York. It's
absolutely. In the context of the book, that milieu, as you're saying, I mean, of course, to admit that would be negligent, to put it mildly, as a writer. Um, I'm looking at the time, and we're officially out of time. We always go a little over time. We usually have this for the post game, so I encourage folks to please, put your questions into the local chat. I think we're going to go, use the post game, and, just keep the stream going on, a little bit longer.
great.
Uh, I have a few, things that I need to address. First of all, I need to address, that both your parents are famous, but I'm only infatuated with one of them. Uh, your parents are a well-known journalist, and I'm a big fan of your mother.
Oh,
They
thank you.
Huge inspiration. I started in radio in 2000, actually in 1999, but the NPR station was 2001, and that's when the On the Media, the program that your mother still hosts and produces, I believe,
Yep.
is still on the air, and it came on the air around the time when I started, working at an NPR station, and it's one of my favorite shows.
I'll tell
Um,
her. She'll be delighted.
please do tell her, and she actually also wrote a book, and the book is here on the ground.
She's she's written a couple of books. She wrote The
Oh,
Influencing Machine, which is a graphic
oh, that's
novel
right.
about media, and a more recent, sort of more pamphlet, called The Trouble with Reality, which
That's the
is,
one I have here.
yeah.
I'm making it really big here so the camera can see it. Uh, your father wrote a whole bunch of books.
My
Um,
father is he's the war stories columnist for Slate. His name is Fred Kaplan, and he's written lots of books on nuclear history and the history of cyber war. He's very prolific.
he also wrote a book called 1959. I have it here on the ground. I
Yeah,
can't quite retrieve it because
and
I
that's all about his theory of, culture all kind of reaching the tipping point in 1959. And there really is a lot of remarkable things that happened in 1959 that you can, like, that's when the birth control pill was approved by the FDA. That's when Birth the Cool came out. Norman Mailer published one of his big books then. It was a lot. There's a lot going on that year, so it's a fun read.
really interesting. I don't want to get, waste or spend your time discussing your parents. The only reason why I bring it up is, because I think it's an obvious question that I grew up with, a friend of mine who I worked with in music. His father produced Queen, some of the most
Wow.
famous Queen albums, and we actually were, hired writers for a while. And it occurred to me that he was somewhat paralyzed by wanting to, um, please his father with stuff that needed to be sort of extraordinarily good, while his father certainly had a high sort of standard, did not really expect that. So my simple question is, when you grow up with these practitioners of the craft, do you feel like you're a little, not paralyzed, but you need to prove to them that because you're dabbling your in that same profession.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for me, my parents, at least not yet, haven't really written fiction, so that that
Right.
that helps. But no, I mean, it certainly, I think it did mean that I didn't dive in perhaps quite as young as I wish I would have, because you want to live up to the example that your parents set, which is hard to do. And I'm it's not going to happen really. I've got two Peabodys and a Pulitzer in my parents. It's not gonna get there.
Hmm.
So you kind of have to let that go eventually.
And I think, I mean, you wrote two books, so you're able to see yourself as an individual person with an individual story
It
to
took a
tell.
lot, a little longer than I wish I had started, believing in my ability to write a whole novel maybe 5 years earlier than I did, but
Mhm.
got there eventually.
But you don't think that has anything to do with your parents, or they did not put these high
No,
standards on
they're
you?
I mean, I don't think they meant to. I mean, I think I might have felt that way, but it's certainly not something that they've been extremely supportive of this. And they actually just read I just gave them the thing that I wrote for notes, which was very funny. But yeah, no, they're very supportive, and they I think that they, didn't know very much about YA, and they know more now.
See, this is
But
good. I think that's what Julian, when he, my queen producing friend, where the father was a queen producer, I think that's why he got into that's why Julian started to do started to do hip hop, I guess. Actually, he didn't. He did heavy metal. So, but I digress, because another interesting fact of your life is that you are a private investigator. And of course,
I
I'm sorry, I need to bring this up because when I first talked to you, I thought like, wow, this is cool. You're like sleuthing around there with a magnifying glass,
I know,
looking at fingerprints and stuff. Is that
I'm
not
so
what's happening?
sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry to trash everybody's dreams, but no, I don't do that kind of investigative work that off. We don't really do any domestic work. Like there's no philandering husbands or runaway teenagers. That's not what I do. There is an investigative element and there's a certain stealth element to it, but it's mostly sort of corporate investigations and background checks and gathering information. Basically, what I tell people is my job is I do a lot of internet research and then I lie to people over the phone and then I write reports on it. And that's my job.
So this is like is this pre like headhunting type situations, or when you just
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's kind of intellectual property related, so like trademark or infringement and that kind of things, or a prelude to intellectual property protection. So
Mhm.
so it varies a lot. It's find out about this product. When did it come out? How is it designed? Who is it marketed towards? How is it marketed? How is it sold? Those kinds of questions. So it's more information gathering than I think what people generally picture when they think of private investigator.
Is this day job draining, or is it does the balance between that and then writing, Barragan says here, is this industrial espionage that you're doing? Well, she can't confirm or deny, otherwise, people are watching this stuff. Um, hmm.
No, nothing quite as exciting as industrial espionage. But I think I mean, I used to work in publishing when I first, well, actually, I worked in publishing from when I was 16 on basically until my early 20s when I got this job. And I think that might have been too much of my creative brain space to
Mhm.
stay in and continue to write. And yeah, a day job is draining because it's a full-time day job. And as I'm sure many people watching this know, full-time day jobs are very draining. But I'm very lucky to have it, certainly. And
But you're saying it's a different muscle than a creative
yeah,
thing,
it's
and
it's
then.
a different
Mhm,
mental muscle, I think. I mean, and
mhm.
certainly I get burnt out, and I have fewer hours in the day to devote to writing than I would like to. But it's a good case scenario, put it that way.
Now, Shyla, our researcher found this out that in 2012, 10,000 YA books were published. And you just mentioned you started in publishing. Actually, Shyla asked what influenced you to start in publishing so young. Well, she was just thrown out there and said the parents, these famous Pulitzer Prize winning parents, were saying like, you got to earn your keep, go to work in publishing. But yeah, since you worked in publishing, it says actually on the sleeve of Wench. Let me see, what does it say? It says publishing world veteran. So yeah, I mean, can you give us tips? Why did you okay, these are a million questions rolled into one. Why did you start this early? Can you give us any tips or
Well,
aspiring artists
yeah.
and writers?
Well, I mean, I started working in it early, frankly, because I could. I lived in New York. So and that's where most of US publishing happens. So, I wasn't, I was going to school, obviously, but in the summers, I would get internships with publishing companies. And then I continued doing that during breaks from college and then after college. So I worked in a lot of different ways. I worked at a literary agency, I worked at a small children's publishing company, I worked at a sort of a very well-known independent press, and then I was a managing editor when I graduated college, and I sort of worked all over. But this was also when I left. It was also in 2009 where everything crashed, and it was just sort of hard to get advancement, and I wasn't sure whether that would be where I wanted to go anyway. So I kind of I pivoted hard. But in terms of advice for people who want to write is really just finish it.
But
Really
if you
just
cut
finish it.
through, I mean, I just put, sorry to interrupt, but the slide in the back, 10,000 YA books in 2012. I don't know what the number is this year or the last, I'm
Oh,
assuming
it's probably more. It's
probably
probably
more.
far more.
But I mean, how do you even cut through the clutter in terms of pitching? Is there like, I mean, is there like a something
I
that
mean, you
will
have to
sell?
query. No, you
Hmm.
just have to. I mean, the problem is that if you try to write to trend, you're going to
Hmm.
run out of time because nothing happens that quick and the trend will be done.
Hmm.
Because it's some publishers accept unsolicited manuscripts, I mean, unagented manuscripts. Most don't. So at least that's mainstream publishing. And if you have questions about self-publishing, that's a whole other thing that I have huge amount of respect for and have no idea how to do. I would have
Hmm.
no idea how to self-publish. But there's lots of people who know lots of things about that, and it seems that for some people it's the way to go. But if you want to be traditionally published, you really do have to do the thing that everyone hates, which is send out query letters and send out a lot of them.
The
And
query letters include a synopsis of what you're pitching there, or what does the
yeah,
query letter
query
include?
letters, and there's a lot of really good resources out there. I would recommend that anyone interested go to querytracker.com is a really good resource. Basically, and different agents have different submission requirements, but a query letter is basically a short synopsis, a short pitch of what your book is, and a little paragraph of bio, what your writing experience is. And then usually you also attach maybe the first chapter or the first 30 pages, depending on what that particular agent asks for. And it's, yeah, querytracker.net, not .com. Sorry, it's been a while since I've been on that. Um, and that process is very slow, because it's real
Mm.
people reading it. And it just sort of, so there is no way to game out what's going to sell, really. I mean, make sure you're pitching appropriately. Don't pitch something as YA if it's about a 23-year-old, because
Hmm.
that's not YA. And
So you
it's an
gotta,
arbitrary distinction, but it's one that people really do stick to.
wow, but that's already putting people in such boxes.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
that's really the
terrible.
thing. Yeah.
Mm. I mean,
So it
to me, I mean, I'm so glad that I don't know, I sound like a boomer. I'm so glad that I'm old and somewhat secure in my artistic output and confident in that what I have to say makes sense, and that I got a certain standing within a certain community where they feel what I have to offer. Um, works for them, so I don't have to sort of mold myself towards these expectations. But I would find that incredibly limiting if I had to pitch something that is so narrowly put into a box, even before I uh, have the slightest chance to even sign any type of deal. I'm already making compromises beforehand. No?
Yeah, I mean it's a slow process, and that's the thing that is, I think, hard for. I think that that's where a lot of people end up stopping. Is that they just, you know, kind of get frustrated with the process, which is lengthy and baroque and
No, I mean the
kind of
lengthy process,
arbitrary.
right? The lengthy process. But what I also mean is to that you confine yourself to these sort of genre conventions right from the top. I mean, if you have a sort of a sprawling idea, that might be a great. I mean, we have an incredible, um, history of music and books and films and art that is, to use an overused word, genre defying, and it seems that this sort of application process, if you will, is already sort of limiting the imagination very, very early on.
Well, I mean, you don't have to
No?
pitch it. That's a very specific YA thing. Like, just, don't
Ah.
pitch something as YA. Like, but you don't have to be as specific with your genre conventions if you're pitching like within the
Oh, I see what
category.
you're saying. Right, right, right.
Yeah, basically just make sure you're describing what you're saying correctly. Like, don't describe something about a 30-year-old as a YA. Don't describe, you know, some don't describe something as magical realism if it's
In
a
your
straight up
query letter.
second
Oh,
world
I see.
fantasy,
Right, right. Okay, that's as if I were to take my earlier um, comparison. If I would write to a record company that publishes hip hop, and I describe my heavy metal project or something.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
gotcha.
And I think a lot of people sort of don't do the research and just blanket send out things, and then they quite understandably get frustrated.
Well, but a little bit of I mean, come on, a little bit of research. We also must not. Here comes the boomer again. These millennials are so lazy. Okay, we're running out of time. Last question here. What is the question here? There's a million questions. Let's end the stream, and then we have Maxime for 5 minutes for questions. Get your
Sure.
questions ready. Maxine has to get out the door. In real life, she has things to do, places to go. She has to go to an anti-vax protest. No, I'm just joking.
Oh,
Uh,
I got vaxxed right away. I took that
of
BMI
course.
exception. I was like, "Yep, you got it. We're
Of
we're doing
course.
it."
Such a lemming. Everything the government tells you, you're doing. Got to read some more Ayn Rand. I'll tell you. Um, Berrigan says counterpoint working under creative constraints and imposes a discipline that produces great stuff. I completely agree, Berrigan.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just specifically talking about sort of marketing induced genres that are really just helping um, the people who box stuff up to put it in these boxes and put it into shelves. Absolutely, but I agree with your point, of course. Um, so let's wrap up the show, Maxine. This was really, really wonderful. Thank you for coming, and folks, pick up
Thank you
Wench.
for having me and such good questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you want to read uh YA without sex, then you get Wench. And if you want to read, uh, if you want to reinsert yourself into high school drama, The Accidental Bad Girl, and I don't know what's coming up. But what are you reading? This is always our final question.
Gosh, what am I
Maxine,
reading?
what are you
I'm
reading?
I'm about to read the Echo Wife, because I'm in a book club with other sort of thriller horror interested writers, and so we're about to read the Echo Wife, which I'm really excited about. Um, I A middle grade book that I just got that I'm really excited to read because I love this author. She writes chapter books and also YA, and it's a book of horror middle grade, and it's by
Oh,
Anika M. Rose Reese, and it's called Hide and Don't Seek. And I'm extremely excited about that because Anika rips my heart out every time she writes something. So yeah, that's what I'm reading right now.
uh,
One
I
adult book
can't.
and one middle grade.
I can't find the Echo Wave with the author, so please somebody, if you could look it up
The
and
Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey.
Sarah Gailey. Okay, there you go. We got it. Somebody please put a link in the description here in the local chat. And also, what are you reading? Please post that as a comment on the book club trailer on the YouTube channel. Shala just posted the link in there. That's it for today. Let me run through the credit slides real quick. Oh my God, we're running out of time. Ah, this was so wonderful. The time flies when you talk about high school drama. I'll tell you. Second Life Book Club every Wednesday at 12 o'clock SLT, which is Pacific time, or 7 o'clock GMT. slbookclub at Draxtor.com is the email address of this program. And the show is produced by Isabel Sharon, Shala the Super Gecko, and myself, location manager, master builder, Ruby Geek. I will say it a few more times. There is a tip jar here. Ruby takes tips, Shala takes tips. They work for tips. They do amazing, amazing work. And we have an angel coming on stage, a heckler. Oh my God. 90 minutes into the program at the first heckler, and it's an angel with white wings. Welcome. Sorry that I classified you as a heckler. Maybe you just confused the stage with the audience area. We welcome you to the book club, Principe Patates. Let me go through the slides here. You can stay, of course, here. We need more angels in the world. The avatars are made by Ruby. The research is by Shyla. Special thanks, Marianne McCann, Arden Schwartzman, Theanine, AJ McDowell, Brett, and Patch from Linden Lab, and all the moles over at Linden Lab. We have a whole bunch of sponsors. We'll put a sponsor part of a sponsor showcase here on island number 3. The book club is sponsored by all these people that you see here. I'm not going to read them all. You will find their wares on the archipelago. And again, the tip jar is right here in front of me. Put your loose Linden dollars in there. slbookclub at Draxtor.com. Spread the word to book lovers all over the grid. Bring them here. And we're back next Wednesday, but we're also back tomorrow because we are insane. Tomorrow is a special show. I was tricked into a show by Meg Mundell, who was here before. Meg Mundell said, "Can you not invite Ivy Pochoda, who is a highly regarded author?" And Meg said, "Can you please invite Ivy Pochoda because I would like to be on the show with her?" And I said, "Of course, I'll call her." And I called her, and Ivy said, "Of course, I want to come to the SL Book Club." So tomorrow at 5 p.m. SLT, we will talk about homeless folks, houseless folks. We will talk about terminology, but both Meg and Ivy have worked with the homeless population and other marginalized communities. Really, really important work. Ivy teaches writing at a place on Skid Row in LA. Meg has written and edited a book where people who experienced homelessness write about their experience. It's a wonderful book, and that's tomorrow. Please come aplenty. Bring your questions about the issue. It's at 5 o'clock tomorrow, right here on the Second Life Book Club. And that's it. Goodbye. Bye,
Bye. Thank you
Maxine.
so much.